The German shepherd stood guard, refusing to leave the baby's crib. No growl, no bark, just an unwavering stance. The parents dismissed it as odd behavior, until one chilling night they checked the baby monitor, and what they saw forced them to call 911. The night air inside the grand estate was heavy with silence, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the baby monitor. Olivia and Mark Harrison had built their lives on precision, carefully structured schedules, security cameras, and a household where everything had its place. Their sprawling mansion sat on the edge of a secluded woodland, a haven of glass walls and modern luxury. Yet despite the perfection of their world, something felt off. Their German shepherd Max had never acted like this before. He was a dog trained to obey, disciplined yet affectionate, a protector in the truest sense. But for the past week, he had refused to leave the nursery. It wasn't just a passing quirk. He sat rigid, ears pricked, eyes locked onto something unseen. Every time Olivia walked into the room to check on baby Noah, Max would tense, his muscles coiled as if ready to lunge. At first, Olivia brushed it off as a phase. Maybe Max was just being overprotective, sensing something she couldn't. Maybe he was responding to Noah's scent, forming an even deeper bond with the baby. But when she tried to lure him out of the room with treats or commands, he refused. He wouldn't even budge for Mark, who was normally the alpha in Max's eyes. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit. One evening, Olivia sat in the nursery, watching her son sleep. Noah's tiny chest rose and fell beneath the soft blue blanket, his fingers curled into delicate fists. The gentle glow of the nightlight painted the walls in a warm hue, casting long shadows across the room. It was peaceful, yet the unease in her chest wouldn't fade. She turned her gaze to Max, who sat near the crib, still as a statue. His ears twitched, responding to a sound she couldn't hear. Every few minutes his gaze would flick toward the closet. She followed his eyes, her pulse quickening. The closet door was slightly ajar. A shiver ran down her spine, but she shook off the paranoia. "You're being ridiculous," she muttered under her breath, standing up to close it. As soon as she did, Max let out a low, rumbling growl. Olivia froze. She had never heard that sound from him before. It wasn't aggression. It was something else. A warning. She backed away slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Maybe she was just overtired. Maybe she was letting her imagination get the best of her. But later that night, as Olivia lay in bed, she couldn't shake the image of Max's tense form in the nursery, his unwavering stare fixed on that closet door. Something wasn't right. The next morning, Olivia found Max exactly where she had left him, stationed beside Noah's crib, his body rigid, eyes alert. His food bowl remained untouched. Normally, he would leap up at the sound of breakfast being prepared, tail wagging as he followed her into the kitchen. But today, he refused to leave the room. Mark walked in, rubbing his temples from a restless night. "Liv, this is getting weird," he muttered, glancing at the dog. "He's never acted like this before. Maybe we should get him checked out." Olivia hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the crib. "I don't think he's sick, Mark. I think he's watching over Noah." Her husband sighed, crossing his arms. "Or he's reacting to something. Maybe a scent? A sound? Dogs are hypersensitive. Could be anything." "Then why only in the nursery?" she countered. "Why does he keep staring at the closet?" Mark's expression shifted, a flicker of unease crossing his face. He turned toward the closet door and yanked it open, revealing nothing but neatly folded baby clothes, diapers, and a few boxes on the top shelf. "See? Nothing. You're overthinking it." Olivia wanted to believe him. She really did. But Max's growl from the night before lingered in her mind. Later that afternoon, while Mark was out for a meeting, Olivia decided to test something. She lifted Noah from his crib and carried him to the living room. Max followed close, always keeping the baby within sight. But the moment she stepped back into the nursery, Max tensed, his body low to the ground, his eyes darting toward the closet once again. The hairs on Olivia's arms stood on end. She walked toward the closet, deliberately slow, her breath shallow. Reaching out, she placed her hand on the handle, hesitating before pulling it open. The scent of fresh laundry and baby powder greeted her, nothing unusual or out of place. But just as she was about to shut it again, a whisper of movement made her freeze. It was faint, almost imperceptible. A soft rustling. Her blood ran cold. She jerked backward, nearly stumbling over the rug. Max erupted into a series of barks, his body pressed low, ears flattened, his teeth bared. Olivia's pulse hammered as she slammed the closet door shut, her hands trembling. Was it a mouse? An animal that had somehow gotten in? That had to be it. But deep down, something told her that wasn't the case. Max wouldn't be acting like this over something small. As she clutched Noah tighter, her mind raced with possibilities. Could someone have broken in? Was something inside the house? The uneasy silence of the nursery pressed against her. That night, as Olivia lay in bed, the baby monitor crackled beside her. She watched Max through the small screen, still stationed beside the crib, staring at the closet. And then, at exactly 3:14 a.m., the closet door creaked open on its own. The creaking sound from the baby monitor jolted Olivia awake. She sat up, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the tiny screen. The nursery was dimly lit by the soft glow of the nightlight, but the shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. Max was still there, rigid, ears pricked forward, his body coiled like a spring ready to pounce. His gaze remained locked on the closet. Olivia's breath came in shallow gasps. She nudged Mark beside her. "Mark," she hissed, shaking his arm. He groaned, barely stirring. What?" She shoved the monitor in his face. "The closet door. It just moved." That got his attention. Mark sat up, blinking at the screen, his drowsiness fading fast. He squinted at the tiny black and white image, then turned toward the nursery door. "It's probably the AC or something. I'll check." Olivia grabbed his wrist before he could get up. "Mark, please, be careful." He gave her a small, reassuring squeeze before heading toward the hallway. Olivia held her breath, watching as he disappeared into the darkness. She could hear the faint creak of the nursery door opening, followed by silence. Then, Max's growling, low and threatening. "Mark?" she called out, swinging her legs off the bed. A beat of silence. Then, "There's nothing here, Liv." She hurried after him, unable to shake the thick weight of dread in her chest. When she reached the nursery, Mark was standing beside the crib, rubbing his temple. "Max is just being paranoid," he muttered. "The closet's empty." Olivia glanced at the door. It was wide open now, revealing the same neatly stacked shelves as before. But something felt off. Max hadn't moved from his spot. His entire body was trembling, his teeth bared. Mark sighed. "Liv, I swear, if we take him to the vet and find out he's just acting up—" "Shh." She barely registered her own voice. She was staring at the closet, the air in the room suddenly too thick to breathe. Something was wrong. Max took a step forward, his growl deepening. His eyes weren't on the closet anymore. They were locked on something above it. Olivia followed his gaze and froze. There, wedged between the top shelf and the ceiling, was a small black handprint. Her stomach twisted. "Mark, look." He turned, following her stare. His face paled. "What the hell?" It was too high up for them to have placed it there. Too small to be Mark's. Too dark to be dust. The silence pressed in around them. Olivia could hear her own pulse roaring in her ears. Mark exhaled sharply. "I'm calling security." She nodded, backing away. Every instinct in her body screamed to get out of that room. Mark pulled out his phone, pacing toward the hallway, while Olivia scooped Noah into her arms. The baby stirred, but didn't wake. Max stayed put, his hackles still raised. Then, another sound. A faint, barely there whisper. It came from the closet. Olivia's breath hitched. She wasn't imagining it. The whispering grew louder, like a hushed conversation just beyond her reach. The syllables were garbled, unintelligible, but undeniably real. She spun toward Mark. "Do you hear that?" He froze mid-call, his expression tense. "Yeah." They locked eyes. Neither of them moved. Then, slowly, ever so slowly, the closet door began to close. On its own. Max barked, leaping toward it just as Mark rushed forward and yanked the door open again. He grabbed the top shelf and shook it violently, knocking a few boxes onto the floor. "Who's in here?" he barked, his voice sharp. Silence. Only the whispering remained. And then, it stopped. Like a breath sucked into the darkness. Mark stepped back, his face drawn tight. "We need to check the cameras." Olivia nodded frantically, clutching Noah closer. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself out of the nursery, down the hall, into Mark's office where the security monitors lined the wall. Mark dropped into the chair, fingers flying across the keyboard, rewinding the footage from the last few hours. Olivia hovered behind him, her pulse still racing. The footage played back at normal speed, Olivia leaving the nursery, turning off the light, closing the door. Then, at 3:14 a.m., the door creaked open. But nothing was there. No figure, no movement. Just Max, standing his ground, his head tilting toward something unseen. Then, movement. A shadow, slithering along the ceiling, just for a second, before disappearing into the closet. Olivia slapped a hand over her mouth. "Oh my God." Mark cursed under his breath. He rewound, slowed the footage. The shadow wasn't a trick of the light. It had form, a shape. It wasn't human. Max had seen it. And now, so had they. Mark's hands trembled as he paused the footage, staring at the distorted shadow slithering across the nursery ceiling. Olivia clutched Noah tightly, her breath ragged. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. The house, normally so grand and secure, suddenly felt suffocating. Mark swallowed hard, breaking the silence. "It's gotta be a glitch," he said, his voice thin, unconvincing. Olivia shook her head, her grip tightening around Noah's tiny body. "You saw it, Mark. Max saw it. That wasn't a glitch." She turned back to the screen, where Max's rigid form was still visible in the frozen frame. His eyes weren't looking toward the closet anymore. They were locked on the ceiling, on the thing that had vanished just seconds before. Mark exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. "Okay, we call the police." Olivia looked at him, her stomach twisting. "And tell them what?" "That our security footage caught..." "What? A ghost?" Mark ran a hand through his hair, frustration creeping into his voice. "I don't know, Liv. But something is in this house, and I'm not waiting around to figure out what it wants." Before Olivia could respond, a deep, guttural growl echoed from the hallway. They both stiffened. Maximum. The sound was unlike anything they'd ever heard from him before. It was primal, raw, like an animal cornered in a fight for its life. Mark shot up from the chair, rushing toward the hallway. Olivia hesitated for a split second, then followed, her heart pounding. As soon as they reached the nursery door, they saw him. Max was in full attack mode, his body low to the ground, teeth bared, saliva dripping from his jaws. His fur bristled like static electricity ran through it, and his gaze was locked onto the open closet. Olivia felt the air in the room shift, an oppressive weight pressing against her chest. The closet door, which Mark had left wide open, was slowly creaking shut again. No wind, no movement. Yet it was closing. Max lunged. A vicious snarl tore through the nursery as the massive German shepherd launched himself at the closet, his claws skidding against the hardwood floor. His body slammed into the door with a force that rattled the walls, and for a split second, Olivia swore she heard something on the other side, something that wasn't supposed to be there. A hiss, Not human, not animal. Something else. Mark bolted forward, grabbing the closet handle and yanking the door open. Nothing. The shelves were intact, the baby clothes undisturbed. The only movement was the slow settling of dust in the air, illuminated by the soft glow of the nightlight. Max was still growling, his teeth flashing in the dim light, his body tense as if he were seeing something neither of them could. Mark turned back to Olivia, his face pale. "Take Noah. Get out of the room." She hesitated, torn between fear and the overwhelming need to stay, to protect. But something in Mark's eyes told her to listen. She backed away, stepping over the threshold with Noah pressed against her chest. The second she crossed into the hallway, the temperature shifted. Warmer, lighter, as if the nursery alone held the weight of something unseen. Max's growling turned into short, sharp barks. His hackles were still raised, his body still taut. Mark's hands curled into fists. He was done being scared. With one last glance at Olivia, he stepped fully into the closet, pushing past the hanging baby clothes and storage bins. The air inside was thick, stale. It smelled of something faintly metallic, like rust. Then, he saw it. At the very back of the closet, behind the lowest shelf, the wall wasn't solid. It was a door, a small, nearly invisible panel, blending seamlessly with the nursery walls. Mark's pulse spiked. "Olivia," he called out, his voice hoarse. She was already stepping back into the room. "What? What is it?" He pressed his hands against the panel. It was stiff, but gave slightly under his weight. "There's a door here." Olivia's breath hitched. "What?" Mark pushed harder. The hidden panel groaned against its old hinges, and then, with a sharp pop, it swung open. Behind it was a dark, narrow space. Not a closet. A tunnel. A cold, stale draft whispered out, sending goosebumps up Olivia's arms. Mark grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight, angling it inside. The tunnel stretched downward, disappearing into blackness. The walls were rough, unfinished wood. A hidden passage. Inside their own house. Olivia's hands shook. "What the hell is this?" Mark didn't answer. He was already stepping forward, his flashlight sweeping the space. It smelled of damp earth and something older, something rotten. Max stayed planted at the threshold, his body rigid, his ears pinned back. He wasn't growling anymore. He was listening. Then, footsteps. Faint. Slow. Coming from deep within the tunnel. Mark's breath hitched. He jerked the flashlight up, aiming into the darkness, his entire body wired with adrenaline. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, something shifted. Not footsteps this time. A dragging sound, like something being pulled. Mark turned to Olivia, his expression tight with barely restrained fear. "Get Noah out of here. Now." But Olivia wasn't looking at him. She was looking past him. Into the tunnel. Her face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no words came. And then, barely visible in the dim glow of the flashlight, something moved. A shape. A figure. It was small. Too small. And it had been waiting. Mark's grip on the flashlight tightened. The tunnel swallowed most of the beam, but in the hazy glow, he could see it. Something shifting just beyond reach. The figure wasn't moving like a person should. It was slow, deliberate, its form too hunched, too unnatural. Olivia's breath hitched. "Mark," she whispered, clutching Noah closer. "Get away from there." Mark took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to listen. But before he could move any further, Max snarled and lunged into the tunnel. His powerful body barreled into the darkness, his growl echoing off the narrow walls. Then, an ear-splitting yelp. A sound Olivia had never heard from Max before. Pain. Her stomach twisted as she saw Max stumble back into the nursery, his legs buckling. He collapsed onto the floor, his breath coming in heavy, ragged gasps. "Max!" Olivia rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside him. Her hands shook as she ran them over his body, searching for injuries. His fur was damp, too damp. Mark's flashlight caught the dark stain spreading across Max's side. Blood. Olivia gasped. "Oh my God." Mark yanked her away, his face pale. "We're leaving. Now." He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the hallway. Olivia clutched Noah so tightly he let out a small cry, but she barely registered it. Behind them, the closet door began to creak shut. Mark didn't hesitate. He grabbed the handle and slammed it closed, shoving the nursery dresser in front of it. A deep, resounding thud came from inside the closet. Something had just hit the door. Hard. Max whimpered, struggling to stand. Olivia scooped him up as best she could, despite his size. He was still breathing, but his body trembled with exhaustion. Mark didn't say another word. He grabbed Olivia's free hand and pulled her down the hallway. Every shadow in the house felt wrong now. Every darkened doorway a threat waiting to be seen. They made it to the front door, Mark fumbling with the locks. His hands were slick with sweat. Then, another sound. Not from the tunnel. From the baby monitor. It crackled to life, static fizzing through the speakers. Olivia turned, her pulse a drum in her ears. And then, through the white noise, she heard it. A voice, software whispering, "He doesn't belong to you." The monitor cut to silence. Olivia choked on a breath. Her entire body went rigid, fear burrowing deep into her bones. Noah. She tightened her hold on him, her heartbeat slamming against her ribs. Mark didn't waste another second. The lock clicked, and he yanked the door open, ushering Olivia and Max outside. The night air hit them like a slap, but Olivia barely felt it. Her mind was still in the nursery, still on that voice. Still on the thing that was waiting for them in the walls. Mark fumbled with his phone. "I'm calling the cops." But Olivia barely heard him. She was staring up at the nursery window. The light was still on. The curtains swayed slightly, as if caught in a breeze. But the window was shut. And then, she saw it. A shadow. Standing just behind the glass. Small. Still. Watching. A sob caught in her throat. Something was in there with them. And it wanted Noah. Mark's hands were slick with sweat as he tried to dial 911. His fingers fumbled over the screen, but Olivia barely noticed. Her eyes were still locked on the nursery window. The shadow was gone. But she knew. It was still in there. Max let out a weak whimper in her arms, his trembling body pressing into hers. He was still bleeding, but he was alive. She turned to Mark, voice shaking. "Hurry up." "I'm trying," he snapped, his voice tight with panic. The phone rang once, twice, then, 911, what's your emergency?" Mark let out a shaky breath. "We need help. We think there's an intruder in our house." A pause. The dispatcher's voice remained calm. "Are you in a safe location?" "We're outside. Our dog was attacked." Then, something in the house moved. Not just inside the nursery. Everywhere. A deep, groaning shift in the walls, as if the very foundation was exhaling. Olivia turned toward the front door just as the security system let out a sharp beep. Motion detected. Then, click. The door swung open on its own. A gust of air rushed past them, carrying a scent that made Olivia gag. Rotting wood, damp earth, something old and sickly sweet. Mark staggered back. "What the hell?" The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone. "Sir, are you still there?" Before Mark could answer, the baby monitor crackled back to life. Soft breathing. Noah let out a sudden cry in Olivia's arms, his little hands clutching at her shirt. He was scared, and so was she. Mark's grip on the phone tightened. "Get the police here now." He grabbed Olivia's wrist and yanked her toward the driveway. "We're leaving. Now." But Olivia couldn't move. She was staring at the baby monitor still clutched in her free hand. The static flickered. Then, movement. The camera inside the nursery shifted. Something was in there, touching it, moving it. And then, clear as day, a voice whispered through the speakers. "You shouldn't have taken him." A strangled sob escaped Olivia's throat. Her entire body went cold. Mark saw the horror on her face. "Liv!" Bang! A deafening crash erupted from inside the house, the sound of wood splintering, glass shattering. Then, silence. Max let out a low growl, but he was too weak to move. Olivia cradled Noah closer, her hands clammy against his tiny body. She didn't want to turn around, didn't want to look back at the house. But she did, and she wished she hadn't, because standing in the doorway, half in shadow, half illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light, was a figure, small, unmoving, watching, a child. No, not a child. Something that only looked like one. Its head tilted, unnatural and slow. Its arms hung stiffly at its sides, too long, too thin, and its face. It had no eyes, only dark hollow sockets that stretched too wide, as if something had clawed them open. Mark's breath caught. He stumbled backward, his mind struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. "No," Olivia whispered, barely able to speak. The thing didn't move, didn't breathe. It just stood there. Then, it smiled. Not a normal smile. A slow, creeping grin that stretched impossibly wide, cracking along the edges of its pale, dry lips. Olivia couldn't breathe, couldn't think, and then it moved, fast, too fast. A flicker of darkness, a blur of motion, and it was gone. The front door slammed shut. The porch light flickered out. Mark didn't hesitate this time. He grabbed Olivia and Noah, dragging them toward the car. "Get in!" She barely registered the movement as Mark threw open the driver's side door and shoved her inside. He tossed Max into the back seat before scrambling behind the wheel. The engine roared to life. Mark floored it. The tires screeched against the pavement as they tore down the long driveway, away from the house, away from it. Olivia's hands shook violently as she clutched Noah to her chest. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her heartbeat deafening in her ears. The baby monitor was still clutched in her fist. She didn't want to look, didn't want to see. But the screen flickered, and before it cut to black, she saw the nursery, and the closet door, wide open, and inside, a hand, reaching out. The last thing Olivia heard before the monitor went silent, a giggle. Software sweet, innocent, and absolutely not human. The highway stretched ahead, endless and dark, swallowed by the night. The mansion was far behind them now, but Olivia still couldn't breathe. Noah whimpered in her arms, his tiny body curled against her chest. She ran trembling fingers over his back, whispering, "Shh, baby, it's okay." But she didn't believe her own words. Because it wasn't okay. Nothing was. Mark's knuckles were white against the steering wheel. He hadn't spoken since they sped away. His face was tight, his jaw clenched, but his eyes, were filled with something Olivia had never seen in him before. Pure, raw terror. Max lay in the back seat, his breath uneven. He had stopped whimpering, but his body was still tense. Every few minutes, his ears twitched, as if listening to something just beyond their reach. The road was empty. Yet Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something was still with them. Watching. Waiting. She turned, peering through the back windshield. Their mansion was just a distant silhouette now, shrinking into the darkness. But there, at the very edge of the road, a shape stood in the headlights. Small. Still. Its head tilted just so. Olivia's breath hitched. She blinked, and when her eyes refocused, it was gone. She squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her lips to Noah's head. "It's not real," she whispered, but the words felt empty. Mark exhaled sharply. "What the hell was that, Olivia?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. Mark's grip tightened on the wheel. "That thing, it wasn't a person." Olivia shuddered. "It smiled at me, Mark." Mark swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "We should go to the police." Olivia shook her head, rocking Noah slightly. "And tell them what? That our house has a secret tunnel? That we saw, what, a ghost? A demon? Mark cursed under his breath, slamming his fist against the dashboard. We need help, Liv. She nodded, but in her gut she knew help wasn't coming. They were on their own. She turned back to Noah. He had finally drifted to sleep, his tiny hands curled into fists against her chest. Then, "Mama," a whisper, not from Noah. Her blood turned to ice. The voice was wrong, soft, airy, like a breath against the back of her neck. Olivia's stomach plummeted. She twisted in her seat, scanning the car. Nothing. Mark glanced at her, his face pale. "What is it?" Olivia's breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. The baby monitor crackled. Mark's hands locked around the wheel. "Liv, is that—" The screen flickered to life. The nursery. The closet door was wide open. Olivia clamped a hand over her mouth. The static fizzed. Then, movement. A small, pale hand slipped out from the shadows, followed by an arm. Then, a face. The hollow sockets where its eyes should have been turned toward the camera. And it whispered, "You shouldn't have taken him!" Olivia screamed. Mark swerved the car violently, tires screeching as he struggled to control the vehicle. The monitor died. The screen cut to black. Max let out a low, agonized whimper. Mark was breathing hard. "I can't—" He pulled off to the side of the road, his hands shaking. He pressed his forehead against the steering wheel, his entire body trembling. "Olivia," he choked out, "what did we bring into our house?" She couldn't answer, because deep down, she already knew. It hadn't followed them. It had never left. It was always there. And now, it wanted Noah back. The car sat motionless on the side of the road, the engine still running, its low hum the only sound in the thick, suffocating silence. Mark's hands shook as he rested them against the steering wheel. His breathing was shallow, his mind racing. He had seen strange things before, things that made his skin crawl, but nothing like this, nothing that had stared back. Olivia sat frozen in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped protectively around Noah. He was asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling peacefully, as if he hadn't just been claimed by something unnatural. Max lay curled in the back seat, his body tense. His ears twitched at every small noise, but he wasn't growling anymore. He was listening, waiting. Mark finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "We have to go back." Olivia's head snapped toward him. "Are you insane?" Mark's jaw clenched. "We left something in that house, Liv, and it's not going to stop." She shook her head violently. No, we can't. We have Noah. We need to keep him safe." "He's not safe." Mark slammed his fist against the dashboard, his voice breaking. "Don't you get it? We took something from that house, Olivia. And whatever's in there, whatever's been watching us, it wants him back." Olivia's stomach turned. "Noah is our son, Mark. He was never theirs." Mark didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked to the baby monitor, now dark and silent in Olivia's lap. A cold dread curled inside him. Then why did it say that? The question hung in the air, heavy and damning. You shouldn't have taken him. Mark took a shaky breath. We need to end this. Olivia squeezed her eyes shut. Every bone in her body told her to run, to take Noah, to never look back. But deep down, she knew Mark was right. They couldn't escape it, not when it wasn't done with them yet. She finally nodded, her hands tightening around Noah. "We go back," she whispered, "but we don't stay." Mark threw the car into reverse, his heartbeat slamming against his ribs. The mansion loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette awaiting open maw against the night. As they approached, the security lights should have flickered on. They didn't. The house sat in total, unnatural darkness. Olivia's breath hitched. "It knows we're here." Mark pulled up to the driveway but didn't turn off the car. "We get in, we find whatever the hell is in that tunnel, and we end this." Olivia hesitated. "And if we can't?" Mark's fingers tightened around the wheel. His voice was grim. "Then we burn that place to the ground." Max let out a low whine, his body pressing against the car door. He was ready. They stepped out into the cold. The air was wrong. Too heavy, too still. No wind, no night sounds. Just the house, waiting. Mark didn't hesitate. He pushed the front door open. It wasn't locked. Inside, the house was colder than the night air. Max stepped in first, his body taut, his nose twitching. His paws barely made a sound against the hardwood floor. The house felt empty, but Olivia knew better. She cradled Noah against her chest, whispering a prayer under her breath. Mark glanced at the baby monitor. It was off. Then, click. It flickered back to life. Olivia gasped. The screen was glitching, distorting. The nursery camera was moving, tilting, as if something was touching it. Mark's breath turned to ice. The closet door in the footage slowly creaked open. And inside, a shape, small, waiting, watching, a child, but not a child. Its body was wrong, too thin, too still. Then, it turned its head toward the camera, and its mouth stretched open, a slow, unnatural grin that cracked the skin at the edges. They heard it before they saw it. A giggle from upstairs. Noah stirred in Olivia's arms. He whimpered, as if he felt it too. Max snarled, his body lowering, his teeth flashing. Then, footsteps. Heavy, slow, dragging, coming from the nursery. Mark locked eyes with Olivia. "It's waiting for us." Olivia shook, clutching Noah so tightly his little body squirmed. "Mark, I don't want to go up there." "We have to." He grabbed her hand. "Whatever this thing is, it's in the walls, in the house. It's been watching us this whole time. We need to finish this." A sharp thud rattled the ceiling above them. Something moving. Then, "Mama." The voice was soft, sweet, wrong. Olivia sucked in a sharp breath. Noah was asleep, but the voice had come from inside the house, the nursery. It was mimicking him. Mark's grip on her hand tightened. "Come on." They moved as one, stepping toward the stairs. Max was at their side, his body vibrating with tension. Each step creaked beneath them. The hallway was darker than before. Shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting along the walls. The nursery door stood open, waiting. Mark stepped inside first. His flashlight cut through the gloom. The crib was empty. The room looked the same, except for the closet. The door was wide open. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "Mark!" Something moved. Inside the closet, a shape shifting just out of sight. Mark clenched his jaw. "Come out." Silence. Then, shuffling. Something dragging against the floor. Mark reached for the closet handle. He hesitated. Then, he yanked it open. Nothing. Just empty shelves, untouched blankets. The air was thick, too still. Then, a breath. Not his, not Olivia's. Above them. Mark tilted the flashlight up, and saw it. Crouched in the upper corner of the closet. Twisting, folding itself, waiting. Olivia's scream ripped through the house. The thing dropped. The thing dropped from the ceiling, its limbs unfolding in an unnatural, jerky motion. Mark barely had time to react. He stumbled backward, shoving Olivia and Noah out of the way as it hit the floor with a sickening thud. Max lunged. His snarl ripped through the nursery as he charged, his powerful jaws snapping. He collided with the thing in a blur of fur and teeth, forcing it back into the closet. For a second, Olivia thought, hoped, that Max had it under control. Then she saw its hand. Thin. Too long. Too many joints. It wrapped around Max's throat. Max let out a strangled whimper. Then, it threw him. The German shepherd's body hit the wall hard, knocking over the bookshelf. He collapsed in a heap, dazed. Mark didn't hesitate. He grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and swung. The thing screeched. Not human, not animal. A sharp, splintering noise, like glass shattering inside a hollow body. Mark's blow connected. The lamp cracked against its head, sending it lurching backward. That was their chance. "Run!" Mark bellowed. Olivia bolted. Noah was still clutched in her arms, his tiny face buried in her shoulder. She flew down the stairs, her legs numb with terror. Mark was right behind her. But so was it. The thing moved too fast. It didn't run, it crawled. Its limbs bent in ways that made Olivia's stomach lurch. It clawed its way down the walls, skittering like an insect. It wasn't chasing them. It was playing, hunting. The second Olivia reached the front door, she fumbled with the lock, her hands slick with sweat. Come on, come on. Mark spun around, gripping the broken lamp like a weapon. Max staggered to his feet, growling low. The thing stopped, perched on the ceiling, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It was smiling, a slow, stretching grin that split its face too wide. Then, it spoke. Give him back. The voice was wrong. Software familiar. Noah's voice. Olivia's blood ran cold. Mark's face twisted with horror. No. His voice was a ragged whisper. You can't have him. The thing twitched. Then, it lunged. Mark swung hard. The lamp smashed into its face, shattering glass, breaking skin. But it didn't stop. It shrieked. A piercing, bone-rattling sound that made the walls tremble. Then, it vanished. Gone. Just like that. Olivia gasped for breath, her entire body shaking. Mark's chest rose and fell rapidly, his knuckles white around the shattered lamp base. Max let out a weak whimper, his body still tense, his eyes scanning every dark corner. For a moment, the house was silent. Then, bang. The nursery door slammed shut upstairs. Mark grabbed Olivia's arm. We're leaving, now. They ran. Out the door, into the freezing night, away. The second they hit the car, Mark floored the gas. The tires screeched, kicking up gravel. The mansion blurred behind them, its dark silhouette watching as they fled. They didn't stop driving, not for miles, not until the house was nothing but a fading nightmare. Not until they felt safe. But Olivia knew the truth. They would never be safe. Because in the silence of the car, over the distant hum of the road, the baby monitor crackled, and through the static, a soft, familiar voice whispered, Mama. The car sped down the highway, the mansion shrinking in the rearview mirror. Mark's hands were tight on the wheel, his knuckles pale. Olivia sat beside him, cradling Noah against her chest, rocking him slightly, even though he was already asleep. The baby monitor lay dark and silent in her lap. But she wasn't fooled, she had heard it. That voice, Noah's voice, except it wasn't him. Mark's voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. Where do we go? Olivia swallowed, her throat raw. I don't know. She didn't. Because where could they go? What police officer, what priest, what scientist could explain what had just happened? They had seen something that wasn't supposed to exist. Something that had lived in their walls. Something that had been watching them all along. And worse, it had wanted Noah. Mark's grip on the wheel tightened. We should get a hotel, somewhere far. Olivia nodded numbly. She turned, looking at Noah's peaceful face. His tiny fingers curled against her sleeve, warm and safe. Her eyes burned with tears. What if it comes back? What if it wasn't done with them? She reached out, brushing a hand through Noah's soft hair. And then, he stirred, his little nose wrinkled, his mouth twitching as he made a soft noise. Olivia smiled weakly. Shh, baby. Noah shifted slightly, his body relaxing against her. Then, he whispered something, software, barely audible. Olivia froze. She swallowed hard, tilting her head down. What, sweetheart? Noah's lips barely moved. His voice was drowsy, thick with sleep. But she heard him. The girl, he mumbled. Olivia's blood turned to ice. Her breath caught in her throat. Number no, no, no. She forced her voice to stay steady. What girl, baby? Noah shifted again, his little brows furrowing. The girl in the walls, he whispered. A sob caught in Olivia's throat. Mark's head snapped toward them. Liv? Her grip on Noah tightened. He was dreaming. He had to be. But Noah's next words stopped her heart. She says she misses me. Silence. Mark slammed the brakes. The car skidded, tires screeching against the pavement as he yanked them to the side of the road. The second they stopped, he twisted in his seat, his eyes wild. "Noah, what did you just say?" Noah stirred again, letting out a tiny yawn. His head lolled against Olivia's chest, and when he opened his eyes, for a second, just for a second, they weren't his eyes. The pupils were too large, too black, like hers. Then he blinked, and they were normal again. Olivia's breath shattered. Mark let out a strangled sound, his hands gripping the steering wheel like he might break it. Then, without a word, he put the car in drive. And they kept going, far, far away, from the house, from it. But Olivia knew they hadn't escaped. Not really. Because the girl in the walls? She had found another way out, and this time, she wasn't alone. Some doors should never be opened. Some things should stay hidden. But what would you do if something reached out from the darkness, and it wanted what you love most? If this story sent chills down your spine, let us know in the comments. Have you ever experienced something unexplainable? Something that made you question what's lurking just beyond sight? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that feel real. And tonight, when you turn off the lights, listen closely. You never know who or what might be watching.